It is urgent to expose your soulmate due to an affair with your. Don't skip. Listen to this carefully. This message is for you, and your heart needs this right now, because what you're about to hear began with something so small that almost nobody paid attention to it at first. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't undeniable evidence. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation. Instead, it started with a feeling. A strange feeling that something wasn't quite right. And listen to this. At first, everything seemed normal. Conversations continued. Daily routines continued. Life appeared unchanged. But beneath the surface, subtle details were beginning to attract attention. Tiny details. Easy to ignore details. The kind of details people dismiss until they begin forming a pattern. And your heart needs this right now because patterns often reveal truths long before facts fully emerge. At first, there were unexpected absences. Then there were unexplained excuses. Then there were moments that felt strangely out of place. Individually, none of them seemed important. Together, they began telling a different story. And listen to this, those closest to the situation tried hard not to think negatively. They wanted to believe there was an innocent explanation. They wanted to believe there was a misunderstanding. They wanted to believe their concerns were unnecessary. But the concerns refused to disappear. Every time they pushed them away, something else happened. Every time they dismissed a question, another question appeared. Every time they ignored a sign, another sign emerged. And your heart needs this right now because intuition can be difficult to silence when it keeps receiving confirmation. The feeling became stronger. The doubts became louder. The observations became more frequent. And slowly, what once felt impossible started feeling possible. Very possible. And listen to this. People began remembering things. Small things. Moments they once overlooked. Conversations that suddenly seemed unusual. Comments that sounded harmless at the time but felt different when remembered later. Every memory became another piece of a growing puzzle. Every piece raised new questions. Every question demanded answers. And your heart needs this right now because unanswered questions have a way of creating tension. The tension grew quietly. The uncertainty grew quietly. The suspicion grew quietly. Until eventually, it became impossible to pretend nothing was happening. And listen to this. The people involved thought everything remained hidden. They believed nobody was paying attention. They believed appearances were enough. They believed explanations would prevent anyone from looking deeper. But appearances only work for so long. Eventually reality starts showing itself. Eventually inconsistencies become visible. Eventually truth begins pushing its way to the surface. And your heart needs this right now because truth is persistent. Truth waits. Truth watches. Truth survives every attempt to bury it. No matter how carefully someone hides something, reality leaves traces behind. Small traces. Subtle traces. But traces nonetheless. And listen to this. Those traces were starting to connect. One unusual moment connected to another. One unexplained event connected to another. One forgotten memory connected to another. And suddenly people realized they were no longer looking at isolated incidents. They were looking at a pattern. A pattern nobody wanted to acknowledge. A pattern nobody wanted to believe. A pattern becoming harder to ignore. And your heart needs this right now, because there comes a moment when doubt transforms into investigation. Not because people enjoy drama. Not because people want conflict. But because uncertainty becomes exhausting. People need answers. People need clarity. People need truth. And that is exactly where this story was heading. The search for truth. The search for answers. The search for understanding. And listen to this. The closer people looked, the more questions appeared. The more questions appeared, the more attention the situation attracted. The more attention it attracted, the harder it became for anyone involved to remain comfortable. Pressure was building. Silence was breaking. Reality was approaching. And your heart needs this right now, because hidden situations often reach a turning point. A moment when secrets stop feeling secure. A moment when explanations stop feeling convincing. A moment when the truth starts moving faster than the people trying to avoid it. That moment was getting closer. Day by day. Question by question. Observation by observation. And listen to this. Deep down, many people already sensed it. Something significant was waiting beneath the surface. Something important had not yet been revealed. Something capable of changing relationships, perspectives, and decisions. The signs pointed toward it. The questions pointed toward it. The growing tension pointed toward it. And your heart needs this right now, because sometimes the most powerful stories begin with a single feeling that refuses to go away. A feeling that says, "Pay attention." A feeling that says, "Something isn't adding up." A feeling that says, "The truth is closer than anyone realizes." At first, almost nobody listened to that feeling. Soon, nobody would be able to ignore it. Because what began as suspicion was slowly becoming something much bigger. Something much more serious. Something that would eventually force everyone involved to confront a reality they never expected to face. And this was only the beginning. Don't skip. Listen to this carefully. This message is for you, and your heart needs this right now, because after the first suspicions appeared, the situation entered a completely different phase. What once felt like uncertainty slowly began transforming into something much harder to dismiss. And listen to this, the people closest to the situation were no longer relying on feelings alone. They were beginning to notice details. Patterns. Connections. Things that seemed insignificant by themselves but became impossible to ignore when viewed together. At first, everyone hoped they were mistaken. Everyone wanted a simple explanation. Everyone wanted reassurance. Everyone wanted the doubts to disappear. But the doubts remained. And your heart needs this right now, because when the truth is trying to reveal itself, it rarely arrives all at once. Instead, it appears piece by piece. One observation. One question. One strange coincidence at a time. The first clue seemed harmless. The second clue seemed unusual. The third clue felt impossible to explain away. And listen to this, people started remembering conversations that suddenly sounded different in hindsight. Comments that once seemed ordinary now carried a different meaning. Moments that were dismissed weeks earlier suddenly felt important. The more they reflected, the more details returned. The more details returned, the more suspicious everything became. The more suspicious everything became, the harder it became to stay silent. And your heart needs this right now because silence becomes difficult when questions keep multiplying. Why did certain stories never match? Why did certain explanations keep changing? Why did certain interactions seem increasingly difficult to explain? Every answer created another question. Every question created another concern. And listen to this. The people involved believed they were being careful. They believed nobody was paying attention. They believed appearances would be enough to keep everything hidden. But appearances have limits. Excuses have limits. Secrets have limits. And eventually those limits begin showing. And your heart needs this right now because hidden situations often reveal themselves through inconsistency. One story doesn't match another. One explanation contradicts another. One detail refuses to fit where it should. That is exactly what started happening. The inconsistencies became noticeable. The contradictions became noticeable. The unusual behavior became noticeable. And suddenly, what once felt impossible started feeling very real. And listen to this, some people still resisted the idea. They defended what they wanted to believe. They argued that everyone was overthinking. They insisted there had to be another explanation. But every day seemed to bring another unanswered question. Another unexplained event. Another reason for concern. The evidence wasn't arriving dramatically. It was arriving steadily. And your heart needs this right now because steady evidence is often the hardest to ignore. One clue might be dismissed. Two clues might be explained away. But when the clues continue appearing over and over again, denial becomes exhausting. The pattern kept repeating. The observations kept repeating. The concerns kept repeating. Until eventually the pattern became impossible to overlook. And listen to this. People began comparing notes. Things one person noticed suddenly connected with something another person remembered. Events that seemed unrelated started fitting together. One memory connected to another. One observation connected to another. One clue connected to another. And slowly, the picture became clearer. Not complete, but clearer. And your heart needs this right now because clarity changes everything. Once people begin seeing a pattern, they start paying closer attention. Once they start paying closer attention, they begin noticing things they missed before. That is exactly what happened. The attention increased. The questions increased. The pressure increased. And with every passing day, it became harder for anyone involved to pretend nothing was wrong. And listen to this, deep down, many people already knew where the story was heading. They may not have had every answer yet. They may not have had complete proof. But they could feel the truth moving closer. Closer with every observation. Closer with every contradiction. Closer with every unanswered question. The tension was building. The mystery was building. The pressure was building. And your heart needs this right now because pressure changes people. The closer the truth gets, the harder it becomes to maintain appearances. The closer the truth gets, the more mistakes begin happening. The closer the truth gets, the more visible the cracks become. Those cracks were beginning to show. The carefully constructed story was beginning to weaken. The explanations were beginning to lose credibility. And for the first time, people started realizing that this situation might be far more serious than they originally believed. And listen to this, what started as suspicion was becoming investigation. What started as questions was becoming evidence. What started as doubt was becoming certainty. Not complete certainty yet, but enough certainty to know that something significant was hidden beneath the surface. Something important. Something powerful. Something capable of changing everything once fully revealed. And your heart needs this right now because the closer people moved toward the truth, the more impossible it became to stop what was happening. The questions would not disappear. The observations would not disappear. The evidence would not disappear. The truth was moving forward. Step by step. Clue by clue. Moment by moment. And very soon, the hidden story would no longer remain hidden. Because every secret eventually reaches a point where reality becomes stronger than silence. And that moment was approaching faster than anyone realized. Don't skip. Listen to this carefully. This message is for you, and your heart needs this right now, because after weeks of unanswered questions, growing suspicions, and evidence that refused to disappear, the situation finally reached a turning point. And listen to this, every secret eventually arrives at a moment where it can no longer remain hidden. Every carefully constructed story eventually develops cracks. Every unanswered question eventually demands an answer. That moment had arrived. The tension had been building. The doubts had been building. The pressure had been building. And your heart needs this right now because people can ignore a feeling for only so long. They can ignore a suspicion for only so long. But when evidence starts connecting itself, when patterns begin repeating themselves, and when explanations stop making sense, reality becomes impossible to avoid. At first, everyone wanted one final explanation. One final answer. One final reason to believe everything was a misunderstanding. But that explanation never came. Instead, more questions appeared. More inconsistencies appeared. More revelations appeared. And listen to this. The people closest to the situation started putting everything together. Conversations that once seemed harmless suddenly carried new meaning. Moments that seemed insignificant suddenly looked important. Events that once felt unrelated suddenly connected perfectly. One piece connected to another. One clue connected to another. One memory connected to another. Until eventually the picture became impossible to deny. And your heart needs this right now because there is a difference between suspicion and realization. Suspicion asks questions. Realization answers them. Suspicion creates uncertainty. Realization creates clarity. And that clarity was finally arriving. The truth was stepping into the light. The hidden story was becoming visible. The mystery was beginning to end. And listen to this, when the reality finally surfaced, the reaction was immediate. Shock spread quickly. People struggled to process what they were learning. Some felt angry. Some felt disappointed. Some simply sat in silence, trying to understand how things reached this point. Nobody expected it. Nobody wanted it. Yet suddenly it was there. Impossible to ignore. Impossible to erase. Impossible to explain away. And your heart needs this right now because revelations often arrive differently than people imagine. They are not always dramatic. They are not always loud. Sometimes they arrive through quiet understanding. Sometimes they arrive through undeniable facts. Sometimes they arrive through a moment where everyone simply realizes the same thing at the same time. That was what happened here. The uncertainty disappeared. The confusion disappeared. The excuses disappeared. And only the truth remained. And listen to this, the people involved could no longer hide behind misunderstandings. They could no longer rely on incomplete information. They could no longer assume nobody would notice. Everything was visible now. Everything was exposed now. Everything was changing now. And your heart needs this right now because exposure changes relationships. It changes trust. It changes how people see one another. The same conversations suddenly feel different. The same memories suddenly feel different. The same connections suddenly feel different. The foundation had shifted. The perspective had shifted. The future had shifted. And listen to this, people began asking difficult questions. How long had this been happening? Who knew about it? Why was the truth hidden? Could anything have prevented it? Each question carried emotional weight. Each answer carried consequences. Each realization carried lessons. And your heart needs this right now because consequences arrive whether people prepare for them or not. Reality does not disappear because someone wishes it away. Truth does not retreat because someone feels uncomfortable. Truth remains. Truth waits. Truth survives. And eventually truth speaks. That is exactly what happened. The silence ended. The uncertainty ended. The hidden chapter ended. And listen to this, as the secret became fully exposed, something else happened as well. People stopped focusing only on the affair itself and started focusing on the bigger picture. They started examining trust. They started examining loyalty. They started examining the choices that created the situation in the first place. Because every revelation carries a lesson. Every exposure carries a warning. Every hidden truth leaves behind understanding. And your heart needs this right now because the lesson was becoming clearer with every passing moment. Trust matters. Honesty matters. Integrity matters. The small choices people make every day eventually become the story they live. And listen to this. By the time the dust began settling, one thing had become completely undeniable. The secret was over. The mystery was over. The hiding was over. The truth had won. And once truth wins, nothing can return to exactly the way it was before. The story had changed. The people had changed. The future had changed. Because some revelations do more than expose secrets. Some revelations transform everything around them. And this was one of those moments. Don't skip. Listen to this carefully. This message is for you, and your heart needs this right now, because after the truth was finally exposed, after the questions received answers, and after the hidden story became impossible to deny, everyone involved found themselves facing a reality they never expected to confront. And listen to this. Many people think the hardest part of a secret is hiding it. But often, the hardest part comes after it is revealed. The aftermath. The consequences. The emotional impact. The realization that nothing can return to exactly the way it was before. And your heart needs this right now because once trust is broken, people begin seeing everything differently. Conversations feel different. Memories feel different. Relationships feel different. Even ordinary moments begin carrying a new meaning. The same events that once seemed harmless suddenly look completely different when viewed through the lens of truth. And listen to this. As the shock slowly faded, people started reflecting on everything that happened. They remembered warning signs. They remembered unanswered questions. They remembered moments that felt unusual. Things that once seemed insignificant suddenly became clear. The puzzle was finally complete. The missing pieces had finally appeared. The story finally made sense. And your heart needs this right now because clarity can be both painful and liberating. Painful because it reveals realities people hoped were not true. Liberating because uncertainty finally comes to an end. For so long, people had lived with questions. Now they had answers. For so long, people had lived with suspicion. Now they had certainty. For so long, people had lived with confusion. Now they had clarity. And listen to this. Clarity changes everything. It changes decisions. It changes priorities. It changes the future. Because once people understand the truth, they must decide what to do with it. Some chose distance. Some chose forgiveness. Some chose reflection. Some chose growth. But nobody remained exactly the same. And your heart needs this right now because experiences like this leave lessons behind. Important lessons. Life-changing lessons. Lessons that stay with people long after the details fade. One lesson was about honesty. Another lesson was about trust. Another lesson was about paying attention to actions rather than words. And listen to this. Trust is built slowly. Very slowly. One conversation at a time. One promise at a time. One decision at a time. Yet trust can be damaged far more quickly than it is created. That realization became impossible for everyone involved to ignore. The situation became a reminder that character matters. Integrity matters. Transparency matters. The small choices people make every day eventually shape the lives they live. And your heart needs this right now, because many people focus only on dramatic moments while ignoring the smaller decisions that create those moments. Big consequences often begin with small choices. Big revelations often begin with small secrets. Big endings often begin with small compromises. And listen to this. As people reflected on everything that happened, they started understanding that the affair itself was not the only issue. The deeper issue was deception. The deeper issue was broken trust. The deeper issue was the gap between appearance and reality. Because appearances can be maintained for a while. Reality cannot. Reality always catches up. Reality always leaves clues. Reality always finds a way forward. And your heart needs this right now, because truth is patient. Truth does not rush. Truth does not panic. Truth simply waits. And eventually, truth arrives. That is exactly what happened here. The truth arrived. The truth remained. The truth changed everything. And listen to this. Some people reacted with anger. Others reacted with disappointment. Others reacted with sadness. But beneath every reaction was the same realization. The realization that honesty would have prevented so much pain. The realization that openness would have prevented so much confusion. The realization that secrecy often creates consequences far larger than anyone expects. And your heart needs this right now, because there is a lesson hidden inside every difficult experience. Sometimes that lesson is about other people. Sometimes that lesson is about ourselves. Sometimes that lesson is about recognizing what we deserve and what we should never accept. And listen to this. As time passed, the emotional intensity slowly began fading. The shock became reflection. The reflection became understanding. The understanding became wisdom. People started moving forward. People started rebuilding. People started learning. Because life always moves forward. Even after disappointment. Even after betrayal. Even after painful revelations. And your heart needs this right now, because the ending of one chapter does not mean the ending of the story. New chapters always follow. New opportunities always appear. New lessons always emerge. The truth may have ended one illusion, but it also created an opportunity for growth. An opportunity for honesty. An opportunity for stronger boundaries. An opportunity for wiser decisions in the future. And listen to this. When everything was finally said and done, one truth remained above all others. Secrets may survive for a season. But they rarely survive forever. Eventually, reality speaks. Eventually, evidence appears. Eventually, the truth steps into the light. And once it does, nothing can force it back into the shadows. That was the lesson. That was the aftermath. That was the reality everyone eventually had to face. Because in the end, trust is priceless. Integrity is priceless. And the truth, no matter how long it takes, always finds a way to be heard. Sparkles, the secret ended. The truth remained. And everyone involved was changed by it.